and welcome everyone to today's Synergist webinar, Data Stewardship for Chemical Companies. I'm Kay Bechtold, Managing Editor of the Synergist, the magazine of AIHA. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially Sphera for sponsoring this webinar. Today's speaker is Laura Patrick, who is a Senior Product Manager at Sphera for Chemical Management Software Solutions. Her role focuses on understanding chemical management software needs in the market and ensuring the software built meets those needs. She has more than 10 years of experience in the product stewardship space, including roles in both chemical management and product compliance. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Laura.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with everyone today. As mentioned, I'll be talking about data stewardship for chemical companies and really focused in the area of product stewardship because that's where a lot of chemical companies are focused. So today we'll be spending time, I'm going to just kind of introduce myself a little bit more and Sphera. We'll jump into talking about what data stewardship is. And then we'll talk about 3 elements of data stewardship that I think are really important around know your data, maintain your data, and use your data. And then we'll spend the second half of our time just going through some use cases around chemical management, product compliance, and product sustainability, and how some of this data stewardship practices might look practically in those areas. And then we'll end with some Q&A. So as mentioned, I'm Laura Patrick, and I've been with Sphera for over 9 years and have been in the product stewardship space for, I think, close to 12 years now. I reside in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, with my husband and 2 daughters, and I'm really happy to be with you here today. And then just a brief little bit about who Sphera is. Sphera is a leading global provider of environmental, social, and governance, performance, and risk management software. Sphera exists to create a safer, more sustainable, and productive world. I reside in the product stewardship vertical at Sphera and really focus on chemical management, product compliance, like authoring, and product sustainability. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to just turn off my video, but I'll be back on a little bit later for questions. So we're going to start off with a polling question just to get everyone thinking about where they are with their product stewardship data. So today we're going to talk about the concept of product stewardship and why I think it's important and for chemical companies to take ownership of this product stewardship data. And so we're going to just kind of start off and get everyone thinking about where are you as a company when it's related to your product stewardship data. So do you feel your organization has an excellent handle on your product stewardship data? You could select one of the options: strongly agree, agree, neither agree or disagree, disagree or strongly disagree. So we'll see what the results look like. Looks like, okay, so this is interesting results. So it looks like there's no one in the strongly agree or the strongly disagree, or maybe just one and strongly agree. So everyone's kind of in the middle. So either you are kind of neutral or you're not sure. Some people feel like they have a decent understanding of their product stewardship data, and a few disagree as well. So interesting to get us started. Let's jump to the second poll question. Do you have a data steward that supports you in maintaining your product stewardship data? So either yes or no, or maybe you're not sure. I think this is, it'll be interesting to see if folks have this. So we'll give everyone maybe 10 more seconds to fill out the poll, and when things start slowing down, we'll close the poll. we're going to see the results. Okay, really interesting. So yeah, so about a quarter have a data steward, so that's really great. About 3/4 or about half don't, and then about a quarter is not sure. So it'll be interesting. And then one more poll question before we jump in is, do you know what a data steward is? So let's answer that question. We'll give everyone, this one should be pretty straightforward. Let's see where the audience is at in regards to this. So give everyone maybe 5 to 10 more seconds, and then we'll close this poll. Okay, let's see. So about half and half. It's great. A little bit more than half say they don't know what a data steward is, and that's totally okay. We are going to talk about that today, and that's really kind of the point of this conversation is to help with this understanding. So let's start off by I'm going to describe a few scenarios and see if any of these ring true for you and your organization. So first, you can see in the picture here, an organization maybe places a new product on the market in the US, and then they later plan on expanding to Europe and Japan. But then they find out that one of the ingredients in the new product can't be sold in these other locations. So they're kind of in a pickle. Another scenario, an organization manages hundreds of substance data points in a shared Excel spreadsheet, and that is used to populate countless other systems manually. You can imagine it's not a very easy thing to do. If you've experienced these scenarios or something similar, you probably already have a good understanding as to why data stewardship is important. So what is data stewardship? According to the National Research Council, data stewardship is the activities that preserve and improve the information, content, accessibility, and usability of data and metadata. Data stewardship includes overseeing every aspect of the data lifecycle, like creating, preparing, using, storing, archiving, and deleting data in accordance with an organization's established data governance principles. So data stewardship comes under the umbrella of data governance, but whereas data governance establishes those really high level policies for protecting data against data loss and corruption and theft, data stewardship is more practical and it focuses on making sure those policies are actually followed. So there are many different lists out there or articles that you can find just to understand what data stewardship is. And so what I've done is kind of taken some of the main points that I feel describe data stewardship. So we're going to go through these 6 and then we're going to focus more in depth on 3 of them that I feel apply best to like the chemical and product stewardship areas. So first is know your data, and you're going to hear this a lot during the presentation. So if you don't take anything else away, know your data is one of those key points. This is knowing what data your organization needs and what data your organization possesses. Second, find your data, understanding where in your organization that data is located. Third, maintain your data, making sure that your data is accessible, usable, safe, and trusted. Fourth, control your data, safeguarding the transparency and accuracy of data lineage and enforcing rules and regulations on how data can be used. 5, use your data, helping the organization make the most of its data for competitive advantage. And then finally, transform your organization. And when you do these things that are discussed, you can turn your organization in and create a more data-driven culture. So as I mentioned, we are going to focus on 3 areas that I think folks like in the product stewardship area and folks at chemical companies actually have some influence over. So I wanted to keep it practical. A lot of this is very IT driven, but let's kind of focus on the things that we as product stewards have some influence over. So I think those three areas are know your data, so knowing what data your organization possesses, maintaining your data, ensuring that the data is accessible, usable, safe, and trusted, and using your data, really helping the organization to make the most of the data that you have for a competitive advantage. So let's jump right in and get into these three areas deeper. So first, let's tackle know your data. What do I mean by this? I mean, do you as a leader know what product stewardship or chemical data exists in your organization? Do you know what data you need to do your job effectively? Does your organization even have the data that you need to do your job effectively? Do you have the data needed to help your organization accomplish its goals? So part of my role as a product manager is to understand product stewardship, customer, and market needs. And when talking with people in the industry, I often hear people say, I need this feature or I need this data. And I get a list of things that they need, right? And one of the questions that I always like to ask them is, okay, great. So you need this. What is it that you're ultimately trying to accomplish with this ask, though? Yes, you're asking for this one piece of data, but can you explain to me why that data is so important to you and what it does to help drive your business forward? And in many cases, it can be difficult to articulate exactly why a feature or a piece of data is needed. But when they're able to step back and think about the big picture and visualize their end goal, it really helps them focus and refocus on the most critical pieces and most important pieces of data for the project or for their goals. And so how does this really relate to knowing your data? I think similarly with data, it's critical to see that big picture and vision around your company's product stewardship goals so that you can focus on putting time and effort into getting the right data. Because I think it's easy to say that we need all the data, we need everything, we need XYZ data. But the more data that you have, the more time and effort and resources it will take to maintain. So we want to make sure we're spending our time and resources wisely. So another story, I'm part of a team at Sphera and we call ourselves the Rainbow Optimists. It's kind of a fun name. We're a team of product managers and we dream together about product stewardship data, which sounds funny, but it is true. The team is comprised of experts in product compliance, regulatory data, product sustainability, and chemical management. And the five of us have joined Sphera from 4 different company acquisitions over the years. So lots of variety of experiences. When we started our journey together as a team, our view of product stewardship data was very fragmented and disconnected. But now every conversation that we have, we see more and more and more connections, especially around the data. So let me show you some of those connections that we've been seeing. So for each of the main areas of product stewardship, there are specific types of data that are required to perform the analysis and activities in these areas. Each of these different types of data serves a specific and unique purpose, and you need different types of data to do the activities in these areas. So like for chemical management, you're keeping track of your products and materials, raw materials, safety data sheets, and data about the chemicals themselves that are being purchased. In product compliance, you have other requirements. In order to author safety data sheets, you need things like toxicity and ecotoxicity data, regulatory content that's purpose-built for authoring. And then in product sustainability, you need things, additional things like energy costs and energy requirements for certain materials, transportation costs, all of those things that are used to calculate things like carbon footprints. But depending on the size of your organization, how complex your products are, your industry, your global locations, you might have very, very light needs or very, very heavy data needs, depending on all of these different factors. And when we segregate these activities, that it can duplicate the amount of work, but when we bring them together, there is a great deal of overlap when we look at the commonalities between all of these activities. So, kind of just reviewing the know your data, what are some practical steps to help you as a product steward know your data? So first, as a leader or contributor in your organization, make sure that you clearly understand what your department and company's goals are now and where you're headed in the future. This will really help inform what data and tools are needed for your organization now and in the future. For example, if you are looking to do carbon footprints for, all of your products, you're going to have to look at what data is required to perform those activities. Second, work backwards from these goals to help determine what types of data are required to help you meet these department and company goals. Third, do a gap analysis to uncover missing data that is required to meet these goals. And then partner with other business units in your organization like IT and upper management to make sure that you're getting access to the data you need to accomplish the goals. So now let's talk about the next key area, and that's maintaining your data. Once you know what data you need and you have it, how do you maintain it and make sure that it is usable, accurate, and trusted? This principle can really take us in several directions, from the actual management of the data in the database and how the data is structured. Product stewards won't usually be able to control or influence things like database structures, but we really do have control because usually we are the ones collecting the data, and we are determining whether the data is correct and whether it is being consistently maintained as it changes over time. So let's look at an example of what happens if your data isn't being maintained. This one will really hit close to home for anyone who has experience with SDS authoring. So imagine you author several SDSs every week using some sort of authoring software that utilizes regulatory content. And then one day that regulatory content stops being updated. You might be okay for a quarter or two, but after a year or two, it is very unlikely that from a regulatory perspective, the SDSs that you are creating will no longer be in compliance. This image that I'm showing you here is just a handful of regulatory updates that I recently pulled from a few different sites like ECA and OSHA. And it's describing upcoming regulations. And I think a great example is CLP. So CLP was first published at the very end of 2008. And we are now on, I believe, the 18th ATP, which is the Adaptation to Technical Progress, which is basically an amendment to CLP. We are on the 18th since the end of 2008. So we're getting on average 1 to 2 updates to that regulation per year, which if you're not keeping track of the regulations, that's a problem. So at my company, we do maintain regulatory content and other relevant product stewardship data. We provide regulatory updates to our customers who use our software and do those updates quarterly. And I think one of the key things I want people to understand is that every single quarter, over 20% of regulatory lists are being updated. And this means that if you're not properly maintaining your regulatory list as an organization or partnering with an organization to do it for you, 20% of your regulatory data could be out of date after just one quarter without an update. Another statistic I think that is really important to share is that specifically for the regulatory data that we manage, we have a team of over 40 people that are constantly monitoring regulations. Like that is their full-time job to monitor regulations. And we don't even monitor every single regulation in the world. We, have 600 specific regulations that we manage. And the point here is maintenance of data is a lot of work, especially if it's being done well and being done accurately. So this is not just something that you can just one day decide to do and have all the resources in your organization to do so. And I'm sure I don't have to explain why this could be a problem, but let me kind of connect the dots for you. So if regulatory data is not up to date, your authored documents or reporting could be out of compliance. This really opens your organization up to risk and open up your customers to risk as well when they don't have up to date and compliant data about the products that they're purchasing from you. Another example about how bad data can impact your business, consider an error in just like the flash point of a material that you are selling. So depending on the error, if the error increases the flash point, the classification on your safety data sheet might not be stringent enough, and the product could be shipped without the proper DOT or IATA placarding. That's exposing your organization to regulatory risk. On the other hand, if the flash point is too low, it may needlessly be classified, and then you may be spending money you don't have to on shipping the product as a hazardous material. So just with one little data point, how that could affect your organization. Another type of data that needs to be maintained that's really, I think, good to point out is life cycle analysis content or LCA content. It is used in the calculation of carbon footprints for products. So this is really in the product sustainability area. LCA data sets are changing constantly as well. So they're different than regulatory. So it's not regulatory driven, but we're looking at costs and technologies changing, new materials, supply chain changes, things like that are affecting the LCA content and that data specifically. So ensuring that the LCA content is current and high quality and can integrate into whatever software solutions or internal solutions that you have is really critical in building those rigorous processes and achieving your organization's carbon goals. So how can you as a product steward ensure your organization maintains your data and does it well? So a couple points here. So first, make sure you focus on maintaining the data you need. Maintenance of data takes work and resources. It is expensive to do. So know what data you need to focus on and make sure you're maintaining the data that has value to your organization. You don't want to be spending time and resources maintaining data that isn't valuable to your organization. Second, for high maintenance data that can be overwhelming and time consuming to maintain as an organization, I would recommend finding a trusted partner to support you in maintenance of that data. This would really specifically be for publicly available data like regulatory lists, pure substance data, or like LCA data, things like that companies are maintaining on a regular basis. And then finally, for internal data that your company is responsible for creating and managing, high quality processes can give way to high quality data and automation. So this can mean like establishing rules so that data cannot be entered improperly, requiring specific data be entered so that your data set is complete. A lot of applications will provide flexibility, which force the user to enter data in a certain way with certain values so that the data is high quality and can be used more effectively. Okay, so now we're moving on to the last key area, which is using your data. When you think about using your data, do you as a product steward have easy access to all your product stewardship data? Do you have all the data you need connected and in one place, or are you relying on your IT department or a data team to mine that data for you and put it together from all different systems? Is your data managed corporately or individually by location or business unit? In my role, I have the opportunity to talk with current and prospective clients about the state of their organizational data and where they aspire to be. And one of the biggest challenges that we find, especially in these like large global organizations, is that a lot of this data, this especially for product stewardship activities, is in completely different systems across many locations and many different business units. And it can be really difficult and time consuming to get that data into one place. So this slide shows an example. Imagine company A has 5 locations that are creating and manufacturing and selling new products. And all of that data is in separate systems. And many of the same chemicals are being used, and some, maybe one of them is really sophisticated in what they're doing, and others are not so sophisticated. And then you have company B, which also has 5 locations creating and manufacturing and selling new products. But they have all of their data housed in one unified system with the same processes in place. So instead of creating and managing all of their own data, they are able to share data that is created and can see data created by other sites. In addition, corporate has a global view into all of the data, and they're able to get a holistic view of all of the sites and what is going on in those sites around this data. So of these two organizations, which company do you think has an easier time managing this data? Which is able to access their data more easily, which is pushing their company forward and driving their company in the right direction? I would definitely say company B is that. So centralizing data isn't a new concept, and I'm sure many organizations are already on this journey to move towards digital transformation. What we see, though, is that product stewardship is a bit behind the curve in this digital transformation. So how can you as a product steward help move the needle in your organization? So one, encourage your organization to centralize product stewardship data operations. So get all of the business units to use similar systems and processes and data collection. Not only will that save time and effort, it will get the data in the same place, and you can do much better reporting. If centralization seems overwhelming, partnering with a services or software organization to support you in that process can really help you identify that critical data that we've been talking about, help you establish those best practices and processes to make sure that your data is solid, and kind of help roll it out to the full organization. And then finally, make sure your data is accessible to other applications in your organization. Whether you partner with someone to help you or build in-house, make sure that data is accessible by your organization. This will allow your organization to get more value out of your data. And with the rise of like product sustainability importance for many organizations, making data like a product carbon footprint accessible throughout the organization can be a huge benefit by highlighting your organization as a leader in sustainable practices. So now we're going to jump to some use cases. We are going to have 3 use cases, and all of these use cases are projects that myself and my team have or are currently working on. And during this first example, I will walk you through each of the practical steps that we've talked about around know your data, maintain your data, and use your data. So the first use case deals with ingredient and substance management. So just a bit on terminology here, because we are going to get into some details around these things. And when I say ingredient, I mean a component, which is part of a product or material. And when I say substance, I'm referring to a pure chemical substance like acetone or formaldehyde. So in this first use case, the problem that we are looking to solve is twofold. So first, companies are looking for a way to store substance level data like physical properties, identifiers, and regulatory information about those substances, and relate them to the ingredients in the materials that they are purchasing. They need to do this for a very large volume of materials, like sometimes 40 or 50,000 materials, so not an insignificant number that are being purchased from suppliers. So the data, this composition data, the ingredients does not reside in an ERP system. The second part of the situation is if an accident occurs with a certain substance, maybe it's a spill or an exposure, explosion, something like that, it needs to be very easy for an organization to find where that substance or material is across all of their company, their entire company. So essentially, you need to be able to search for a substance and be able to identify all materials that have that substance in it across all locations for an organization. So to do this, we'll be using tools that take composition data from the safety data sheet, validate it against a substance library, and then give them the ability to search across their materials effectively, do accurate regulatory reporting, and then extract data about ingredients in their materials. And so sorry, that was a lot of information to start out with, but I wanted to share that before I jumped into the specifics on the next slide. So we're going to kind of walk through those practical steps now. So for this situation, we're starting with know your data, and the first practical step was around data goals. So the key data goals here are: one, accurate understanding of composition of materials coming from suppliers and the properties of those ingredients. And then two, I need to be able to quickly locate where a chemical is in every single location. And this is looking at the ingredient or the composition information. And why? I think this is always important to remember. Why do we need to do these things? One, the main reason is so that companies can respond to accidents quickly and adjust any requirements they need to once if something happens. So, and then the other one is so that they can have data about substances in their materials at their fingertips. So getting access to that substance data and relating it to the composition of their materials. And then next, we need to know what data is required. And so in this scenario, the companies will need to know all of the materials that they purchase and use, where they're located, and then the composition of those materials down to the substance level. And then second, they would need a reference library of substance information, which includes like identifiers like CAS numbers, synonyms, physical properties, hazards, and regulatory data. And then third, need to analyze the data gap. So where does this data come from? So composition data usually comes off the safety data sheet, or it can be obtained directly from the manufacturer. In most companies, this data is found or it resides in a chemical management system. The problem with safety data sheets, though, is that the data typically comes in a PDF format. So there's a person or a company that has to digitize the information. But not only that, the data that comes off the SDSs in regards to composition can have many problems. First, there's no standard way to represent ingredients. So many of the ingredients have numerous synonyms. Formalin and formaldehyde is a great example of that. Two common names that are used interchangeably on SDSs. Because of this inconsistency in ingredient naming, CAS numbers are typically used as a way to identify ingredients on an SDS. But what we also find is that many SDSs don't have CAS numbers listed for all ingredients. So, and then the third issue that we see is if the name and CAS are both listed on the SDS, there are times when these combinations are incorrect. So a company is left wondering which is correct. Is the CAS number the actual ingredient, or is the name the actual ingredient? Or maybe it's both. And even more, many companies do not even look at this data, so they're not even analyzing whether something might be inconsistent or right or correct. So not only is this data important, but curated and normalized composition data is critical in getting these companies to achieve the data goals that we discussed from earlier. And honestly, this is really the crux of the issue here, is this inconsistent data that comes from the SDS. And this is because the composition data is missing or incomplete. And if that happens, then the results of their searches, their reports will be incomplete as well, resulting in inaccurate reporting and inaccurate searching during those emergencies. So let's jump to the maintain your data. So for maintain your data, the first thing is we need to identify the data with the highest value to align with our data goals. In this situation, as we've discussed, curated and normalized composition and substance library information is the highest value data to the organization. As we talked about, bad data in is bad, has bad results, bad searches, and bad reports. So this means that we really need to focus on this data and its maintenance as key to the project. Given that the data was being maintained, but the source of the data had issues, a decent amount of work is required to get the data clean. And even further, we can limit the amount of data points required to the minimum data set. So the focus on the highest value data gives the project a focus point. So we will focus and utilize tools to increase the accuracy of that composition data. So the next principle is see if you can partner with an organization that is a content provider. So there's two opportunities here. One, for substance data. Substance data is something that many EH&S providers have and maintain. And it doesn't really make sense for every organization to be self-managing that data, because there are many companies that do that. Another potential opportunity for partnership is in the management of the material and SDS data. While materials being used are unique to your organization, there are many chemical management service providers that take on the burden of indexing the data from the SDS documents and then manage updates to those documents, so the data is kept up to date over time. Not every project will have that opportunity to partner, but if you can partner, it can really save you a lot of time. And then with the last element for maintain your data is establish high quality processes to keep data clean. In this particular use case, validation on the indexed ingredient data that comes from the SDS was very important. So the CAS numbers, alternate CAS numbers, names, and synonyms from the substance library were used to provide validation that the information on the SDS was correct. This also allowed linking ingredient data to the substance data in the substance library, which opened up that data source to these companies. And now on to use your data. So first was to centralize your data. In the case of this example, all the data would really need to exist in one system, especially to get like a holistic view for the organization. But this was already achieved prior to this project, so no additional centralization was required here. And then next was partnering with an organization, because that was already done. Again, this was not relevant for this project. But for the last one, making it accessible, let's go back to those original goals that we talked about. So the original goal were to increase the accuracy when searching for a substance across all materials in an organization and to make that substance data connected to those materials. It is always key to go back to those end goals and ensure that the data that you've been working in actually meets those goals. And in this use case, the solution found did meet the needs and provided tools for users to quickly and easily access the data that they required. Something to remember, if people who need the data can't get access to it, the data is essentially worthless. And so this is how exposing data and making it accessible to those in your organization can help drive better decision making, but it's only possible when it's accessible to those people. Okay, so next we're going to move on to our second use case, and I promise this one will be much quicker. We're going to talk a little bit about regulatory impact assessment. So what is the purpose of a regulatory impact assessment, and what do we mean by that? It's to use regulatory data to understand the impact of regulations to your portfolio of products and determine if you need to take action. So do you if a regulatory change is made, do you have to reformulate? Will you need to reformulate in the future? Do you have to stop selling a product in some geography? Are there new shipping requirements? Do I need to file a poison center notification, or are there other reporting requirement changes? In this scenario, the product information and formulations and regulatory data would really be the key data required to meet the product goal or the project goals here. And then around this use case for maintenance of data, the regulatory data is really the most critical piece, because without that data being maintained, a regulatory impact assessment can't be done. The changing and maintenance of the regulatory data will drive the decisions about whether action is required or not. So the maintenance piece is very important here. The other data that is important is accurate product and formulation information. For products that are being created by an organization or sold, this is typically found in like an ERP system and is usually relatively easy to access. If you remember earlier in my presentation, the maintenance for the regulatory data, though, is very time intensive and constantly changing. So having support in maintaining that data can be very helpful. And then finally, how would you use your data? In this case, tools would need to be utilized to understand which products are affected by regulatory changes, and then action would need to be taken on those changes. This could mean reauthoring a safety data sheet or a label. It could mean pulling the product from the market or expanding to a new market. It really depends on what the regulatory change is. So this is just kind of a more simple way to look at a project or a problem that you're having and look at these elements and see how these elements can support that process. Okay, so our last use case is about product sustainability and science-based targets. And I really wanted to make sure we spent a little time here, because I know this is such a exciting topic right now. So this slide showcases Sphera-specific industry insights from a survey of the market that reinforces the challenges and objectives our customers are facing in relation to science-based targets. So I think these statistics are really interesting. So in the green on the left, showing that the commitment of senior management to science-based targets is 87%. So it's really high and really positive. About 70% of companies are communicating sustainability information publicly, like in an annual sustainability report. And then more than half of companies are in the process or have already submitted a science-based target, which is a highly complex task. But I think this is where the problem is, and the gap is that when we asked how to actually conduct the work, only 26% responded that they use a dedicated system. That means that the rest of the participants are collecting data manually using spreadsheets, or they have no tools in place at all. So knowing how much momentum is behind this transformation to making sustainability a priority for so many governments and so many of the largest companies in the world, the last gap between theoretical dedication and then practical performance is really surprising to us. I wanted to show this slide because I think it clearly shows the disconnect between companies' really lofty goals and then the actuality of the data that they have and the tools to support that data. So not only are companies committing to being more sustainable and have science-based targets, the most interesting thing is that most companies don't actually have the information in their systems to actually execute on these targets that they are creating. And this is very concerning for product stewards and leaders because we really need to make sure that we have the data that actually exists in the organizations to make these claims. And so kind of based on the last slide, so companies are saying that they are going carbon neutral, but are they really? In many cases, they can't even know that they are. So if your organization is currently talking about science-based targets, kind of just some information for you about that. So you can use existing data like bill of materials to assess where you are currently at for CO2 emissions. So the goal would be to efficiently use that data from your ERP systems to automate LCA, which is life cycle analysis calculations for your entire product line. And with the right data and tools, this can be accomplished. But without that full portfolio understanding, organizations really can't claim they're carbon neutral or come up with a strategy to get to carbon neutrality because you can only manage what you know about and you really have to know about like what where your products are at. And then you can use that data to find improvement potentials and determine a realistic path to carbon neutrality. So yeah, so this slide just kind of shows it like that knowing what data you have and using that data to generate like those carbon footprint calculations is really important in understanding those big, lofty carbon neutral goals that many companies are handling right now. And then I wanted to just leave you with this last little slide. One of the things we talk about at Sphera often is an organization's maturity level, whether that is like general product stewardship maturity or some other area. And I really like maturity curves because it helps you evaluate where you're currently at and then gives you a vision of where to go and what could be. So we've looked at several data stewardship models out there and developed this one specifically around product stewardship data. So this maturity model has 4 stages based on the elements I've discussed today. So ad hoc means you aren't doing much in the way of data stewardship and you have a lot of room to grow as an organization. Minimal means that you have some understanding of your data and maintain some of your data, but it's not very centralized and not really well controlled. Managed means you have a good understanding of your PS data, mostly centralized in some organizational data access. And then advanced means you have clear product stewardship goals, which drive the data that you have. You're centralized, you have solid data collection processes, and then you're able to use that to drive your organization towards data excellence. We really hope to see people in those managed and advanced stages, but I'm sure there are still a group of companies that are still in minimal and maybe even ad hoc that still have some work to do to get a handle on their data. So I hope that you can reflect on where your organization is in regards to your data stewardship and how you're handling your data. I hope that these principles and examples will allow you to take something back to your organization that will help. Thank you for your time. We'll now have some time for questions.
Thank you, Laura. It looks like we have around 12 minutes left for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the chat window on the right side of your screen and send to everyone. Laura, the first question I have came in while you were on the slide about data availability for green claims and that survey of the market. The question is, are GHS guidelines integrated into the regulatory data as a whole?
Are GHS guidelines integrated into the LCA regulatory data? I guess is that what they're asking?
I'm not sure. I guess Luis, if
So
you want to
yeah, let me
clarify,
just
but
talk
yeah,
to that a little bit. So
yeah.
typically typically like the GHS regulatory data, there's like a bunch of different data sets that are, important for product stewards. So one of those is around regulatory data, and GHS data would fall under that regulatory data bucket, along with like regulatory lists, uh, like tier two, like those types of lists would all fall under kind of the regulatory data aspect. And then there's another type of data, which is like LCA, which is the life cycle analysis data. And that is currently typically a separate data set from the regulatory data set. And that would have more like electricity costs and like distances, cost to, of vehicles to drive a product from the factory to the end user. So those types of things would be in that LCA data set.
Okay, great. Thanks, Laura. The next question I have is the PS and, oh my goodness, is the PS and IA on the cloud or on premises system? I'm not sure if I'm saying the question correctly.
Is PS, so product sustainability and intelligent and IA. So this is, I think, a Sphera specific question. Maybe we can meet with you and discuss those options later. That
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. The next question I have is, what do you do if you can't get supply chain data from a specific supplier?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that is something that many organizations struggle with is getting that data from suppliers. So it really depends on what the data's purpose is. So for something like product sustainability, there's many different types of supplier data that could be needed. Things is something as simple as just like the components or the ingredients from the material you're purchasing. Usually that is readily available, but maybe like some of the other things like around carbon footprint like might not be available. And so what you can actually do is the LCA data sets, those will often have like default values that can be used in place of that in those unknowns. So you can over time work to get more specific in your supplier data. So you can kind of either choose to just use the LCA data sets to replace the lack of supplier data, or you can, push your supplier to get that data to you, or you can change suppliers. I mean, I think that could happen in the future where companies will make a decision to shift to a new company because they are getting better supply chain data from those organizations. So it's really a business decision for you of whether that is something that is important enough for you to move to a new supplier for if you need that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just wanted to remind everyone that we still have some time left for questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the chat window on the right side of your screen and send to everyone. The next question I have, Laura, is how do companies gather all of the data needed to perform an LCA?
Yeah, so kind of what I was just talking about around from the supplier. So it depends on what data you're looking for. So if that is, you know, data just for an L to like the basic data for an LC that's required, it really comes out of your ERP system most of the time. And so if you have that data, you can put that in, you can just get that directly from your ERP system. So that would be kind of the minimum data set required. And then you will have to push suppliers for more information to get more accurate and information about for those LCAs.
Okay, thank you. The next question I have comes from Megan, who asks, how would you go about getting chemical composition information from suppliers that don't provide any on their SDS? Are non-disclosure agreements best to use, or can you trust a regulatory survey? She says, in my experience, some suppliers have been resistant to providing full composition data.
Yeah, no, this is a really great question. I think it's difficult. So yeah, if they aren't providing it on their SDS, I mean, you can ask for like the full disclosure, but a lot of organizations don't want to provide that. So your options are really, do we, explore other suppliers that might be willing to disclose all the ingredients? A lot of companies will say, if you don't provide this, we will not work with you. That's what a lot of companies end up doing. But if you're not a huge company, sometimes you don't have a lot of clout. And yeah, you're right. Yeah, so you would have to have an NDA in place before the full composition would be disclosed. But what you yeah, so I think that would basically cover it. I do think, yeah, you can trust the regulatory survey in most cases, but if you're not working with if you're working with like a more established company, yeah, I would say that that's pretty trustworthy. Another thing that I have seen companies that we work with do is that they'll actually band together like within the industry, and if they're, because if there's a bunch of small companies that band together and say, we need this data and we're requiring this, and we're not going to buy from you if you don't, then they have more clout to force, these types of information and getting this information from them. So.
Okay, thank you. We're running short on time. Just, all right, full comments just came in. So yeah, I'm sure you can see this too, Laura. Something about particular software, and then another comment about company and their, I guess, process for SDS compositional data.
Yeah.
How would they expect you to?
I'm not sure what CDA stands for, but yeah. So the question is, how would they expect you to create an ingredient list without providing the data? And I think this, it really depends on the organization, because for some companies, SDSs are enough information to use in whenever the company's needing. But in some situations, and there are a lot of companies that will require, the actual ingredient list. So it really just depends on what the organization needs and what they're using the data for. And some organizations just are simple, and they don't need that granular level of the ingredient list. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. We are starting to run short on time. I'll pause here. Laura, if there's any final thoughts you wanted to share before I close out.
No, but if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out. I really, love to connect with you. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out there.
Okay, great. Thanks again. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I wanted to share that we will be sharing all questions from today's event with Sphera. So if we didn't fully address your question, please know that we'll be passing that along. I wanted to thank Laura Patrick for her presentation today, Sphera for sponsoring today's webinar, and all of our participants. Our next Synergist webinar is called Engineered Noise Control Solutions, and that'll be on December 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Registration should open for that one within the next week at aiha.webvent.tv. Hope everyone has a great day.
And this concludes today's webcast. We thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at aiha.webvent.tv. We will send our registrants an email tomorrow with this link. Please visit our event calendar and sign up for future webcasts. Goodbye.